celebrating the 175th anniversary of the Weeping Beech tree, the history of horticulture in Flushing, New York. In honor of the celebrations for the 175th anniversary of the Weeping Beech in Flushing, New York, Bowne House presents an abbreviated history of Flushing horticulture. In a previous episode of the Bowne House podcast, titled Horticulture at the Bowne House, the Parsons Nursery, we discussed the nurseries that the Parsons family developed here in Flushing, New York. In this episode, we will further explore some of the specimens cultivated by the Parsons Nursery, with particular focus on the Weeping Beech tree, which was designated a living New York City landmark in 1966 and placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. The neighborhood of present-day Flushing, Queens, has always been hospitable to plant life. The Native American communities that lived here for thousands of years, including the Matinecock Nation, farmed the land's rich soil, which nurtured a wide variety of vegetation. They also benefited from the breezes coming inland off of Flushing Bay, which helped to keep insects off of their crops. In 1945, the Flushing Historical Society published a short history, The Trees of Flushing, in advance of the 300th anniversary of the founding of the town of Flushing. Historian August Kupka wrote that the nursery business in Flushing had its start in 1737 with William Prince. Today, there exists a wide variety of plant life in this neighborhood from all over the world due to the efforts of these nurserymen. The founding of the Parsons nurseries was the idea of Minister Samuel Parsons. Samuel Parsons joined the Bowne family of Flushing when he married Mary Bowne in 1806. Samuel was a Quaker minister and a farmer from New York City. Samuel and Mary owned property near the 1661 Bowne homestead to the north and east. Samuel acquired trees and shrubs with the intention of establishing a nursery to pass on to his sons upon his death. That land became the well-known Parsons Nursery. Following the death of Mary Bowne Parsons, her share of the Bowne house passed to Samuel. The widower and his children then joined Mary's surviving sisters in the old homestead. Samuel Parsons passed away in 1841. According to A Famous Nursery of Old Flushing by Bertha R. Parsons, granddaughter of Samuel and daughter of Robert Bowne Parsons, she describes the location of her father's office and some of the plants in the greenhouses when she was a child. Quote, "I see the office packing shed as one building on the north side of Washington Place, at about the southeast corner of the present Weeping Beech Park. Back of this building, toward Broadway, Northern Boulevard, stretched some 10 or more greenhouses filled with the pungent, piquant odor of steam heat, soil, and manure. Carnations were in one, camellias, red, white, and striped, in another, roses in still another, and so on."
The long history of the Flushing Weeping Beech trees began when Samuel B. Parsons purchased a seedling on the estate of Baron de Man in Beersall, Belgium. Quote, "All the weeping beeches found today were developed from this first, now famous Weeping Beech of Flushing," unquote, as cited in the 100th Anniversary Flushing Cemetery book, published in 1953. More recollections from Bertha R. Parsons, daughter of Robert Bowne Parsons, tell us how venerated this tree was. Quote, "Northwest of the office stood the unenclosed Weeping Beech. Here was our heavenly playground. To climb the beech, we children could not embrace the much initial trunk with our arms, but nothing daunted, we caught hold each of an outer branch and climbed up and along the limb, I to the Queen's seat and my brother to the King's throne opposite," unquote. This anecdote tells us much in the way of the size of the beech tree already in the 1870s and also of its popularity, the much initial trunk. Among the other specimens introduced to Flushing by the Parsons Nursery was the Japanese maple. You can see this tree right in front of the Bowne House front door. Parsons Nursery later supplied many trees for Central Park in Manhattan and Prospect Park in Brooklyn. When the city of New York acquired Samuel Bowne Parsons' nursery after his death in 1906, they overlooked removal of 14 acres of nursery populated with exotic plantings. Identified in 1981, today you can visit this section of what is now Casina Park, called Historic Grove, located by Rose Avenue and Parsons Boulevard. Parsons Nursery also cultivated a large stock of magnolias. When walking around this neighborhood, you'll discover many markers of local horticulture history, including street names such as Ash, Beech, Cherry, and Phlox. Across the street from the Bowne house sits a stone marker demarcating the site where two enormous oak trees stood, until one fell in 1841 and the other following in 1864. The oaks were pre-existing and were probably centuries old by the time Flushing was settled by European colonists. 100th Anniversary Flushing Cemetery from 1953 pays homage to the long-standing affinity between the Bownes and Parsons and the natural environment. Quote, "Under the great oaks on the lawn of the Bowne homestead, before the famous Friends Meeting House was built in 1694, George Fox, who was one of the founders of the Society of Friends and came to visit in 1672, preached the first outdoor sermon in American history. The famed Fox Oaks were dedicated to his memory, and the site of these trees is today marked by a simple, dignified natural stone memorial." Also down the block from the Bowne house is the Bowne Street Community Church, formerly the Protestant Reformed Dutch Church of Flushing, built in 1892 at the corner of what is now Bowne Street and Roosevelt Avenue. Several of the stained glass windows of this church were created by Tiffany designer Agnes Northrop and feature Parsons plant material. In Bowne House Collections volunteer Ellen Spindler's article celebrating Agnes Northrop, Flushing's Tiffany designer, Northrop is described as a, quote, "female pioneer in the arts and crafts and aesthetic movements and the later Art Nouveau movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as well as a local hero," unquote. Spindler further says that, quote, "As a Tiffany designer, Agnes Northrop emphatically declared she did not do figures, and she became principally associated with flowers, foliage, and landscapes in Tiffany windows. She is known to have loved photography and used it to help her with her designs. She was particularly inspired by the gardens at the Flushing Institute where she lived in Casina Brook." This article can be found at www.bownehouse.org. Thank you for helping us celebrate the Weeping Beech tree. If you want to learn more about the Bowne and Parsons family, please visit our website and book an in-person tour of the Bowne family homestead, which dates from 1661 and was home to 9 generations of family.